Today I'm going to show you how Donald Duck Dunn came up with that awesome blues bass line and some of my personal favourite lines that Donald plays on this version of Sweet Home Chicago.
Back to that same old place, Sweet Home Chicago.
But before we dive in, if you want to get your hands on the full bass transcription written out in tab and standard notation, just click the link in the description below and I'll send it over to you for free. The most popular version of Sweet Home Chicago is by the Blues Brothers, and that's the one we're going to be breaking down today. The actual song was written by blues legend Robert Johnson. The original recording is actually really cool. It's just Robert singing and playing guitar. Have a quick listen.
To the land of California, to my sweet home, Chicago.
Robert is playing a 12-bar blues in the key of F, but because we're focusing on the Blues Brothers version, which is in the key of E, I'm going to explain everything today in the key of E. So to play this song, you need to know the blues or the 12-bar blues form. A simple 12-bar blues, or some people call it a 1-4-5 blues, is where you have 4 bars on the 1 chord. So we're going to do this in the key of E major. So 4 bars on E, then 2 bars on the 4 chord, so 2 bars on A major, and then you go back to the 1 chord, so 2 bars on the 1 chord, and then you go to the 5 chord for 1 bar, 4 chord for 1 bar, back to the 1 chord for 2 bars to complete this 12-bar blues. Now that's a standard simple 12-bar blues. If you went and got up at a blues jam session, that would be the most common 12-bar blues form. But Sweet Home Chicago actually has something what I call a quick 4. This is just one of the many different variations you can do on a 12-bar blues. And it's just simply where you have at the top of the form 1 bar on the 1 chord, and then you go straight to the 4 chord in the 2nd bar, and then you go back to the 1 chord, and that's why it's called a quick 4, because you quickly go to the 4 chord in the 2nd bar of the 12-bar blues, and then you go back to the 1 chord. In Sweet Home Chicago, they also add a 5 chord push in the last bar. I call it a 5 chord push because you're playing the 5 chord, but you're playing it on the and of 2 in the last bar. Have a listen to what this sounds like on Sweet Home Chicago and pay close attention to that push or the B on the and of beat 2.
Sweet Home Chicago. Come on.
So if you want to dive into the blues genre, learning the quick 4 where you go to the 4 chord in bar 2 and learning the 5 chord push on the end of 2 in the 12th bar of the blues is really important to learn. Now when playing on a blues, 99% of the time most of the chords will be dominant 7th chords. It kind of defines the sound of a blues. If you're wondering, a dominant 7th chord is where you take a major chord. So here we would have an E major. So we'd have E, the root, 3rd, G sharp, and the 5th, the B. And then you would put a minor 7th on top of that chord. So we're going to put a minor 7th, which in the key of E is a D. So we have... Now if I played all those notes together on piano, you would have what's called a E dominant 7th chord. So when you're wanting to create your own blues bass lines similar to Donald Duck Dunn, you need to know what notes to play, which means you need to know what scale to play on each chord. So if all the chords on a 12-bar blues are dominant 7ths, the scale you would play is just simply a major scale, and then the 7th note is flattened. It's a minor 7 instead of a major 7. With the minor 7th or flattened 7th is what's called a dominant 7th scale. And this is the scale you would use on the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord. It's the same scale. Now let's look at the main bass riff or bass line. Now if you were to download the whole transcription below, you'll see there's a lot of different variations, but in essence, he's playing one shape primarily throughout the whole entire piece. And the shape, I'm going to use numbers for this so you can actually put it into different keys. The shape, if we're in E, is E1, so he's playing the root note. Then he's going up to the 6th of the chord. So in E, that would be a C sharp. Then he's going to the 5th of the chord. Then he's going to the 3rd. And I actually call this with my students. We were looking at this bass line the other day, and we actually called this the Donald Duck Dunn shape. So we have the root, 6th, 5th, 3rd. Now there are other small notes that he's adding, but the core part of the bass line, like the main notes he's playing throughout the entire piece, it's really that shape. That's it. And then he's transposing that and doing the same formula, I guess you could say, or shape on A. So he'd be playing root, 6th, 5th, 3rd. And then he does the same on B. So he goes root, 6th, 5th, 3rd. This is why it's so key to understand the language of music, because once you understand that really this bass line is just based on that one formula, root, 6th, 5th, 3rd, you can take that formula and maybe say you're playing a completely different blues, but it's a similar vibe and it's in C, for example. You could just take that formula, root, 6th, 5th, 3rd. And this is where it becomes really fun, because you're essentially taking Donald Duck Dunn's vocabulary and you're putting it into your own bass playing. You're kind of stealing some of the words that he's using and you're putting his vocab into your own vocab, so you can start creating your own unique voice on the bass guitar. So in bar 4 of the PDF, you can see he's playing all 8th notes. And then in the second bar, he plays a quarter note and then 8th notes. But then when he goes back to the 1 chord on the 3rd bar, he plays quarter note, quarter note. So he's kind of mixing up the quarter notes and 8th notes. And then he also plays, say in the 8th, 9th, 10th bar. Yeah, he plays... He's doing some triplets, but it's all based around that Donald Duck Dunn shape, right? So root, 6th, 5th, and then here he's just doing the same notes, but he's going 3rd and he's going back up 5th, 6th, root. So once you've got the formula, root, 6th, 5th, 3rd, then you can start messing with the rhythm. You can play quarter notes, 8th notes, or triplets. And before I go on, I must explain that the 8th notes here are swung, which just means the music, it looks like this, so it looks like 8th notes, but it's actually played like this. So when I'm playing this groove, I'm dividing the beat in 3, so triplet, and I'm playing the 1st and 3rd triplet, so triplet, triplet, triplet. It sounds funny to say. By the way, I break down bass lines like this in way more detail with my students. We talk about how you can take bass lines and vocabulary like this and put it into your own bass playing, so you can start creating your own unique voice on the bass guitar. If that interests you, then I've left a link below to an application which you can fill out to potentially become one of my students. Okay, so now I want to share some of my favorite sections from this bass line. Probably my favorite 4-bar section from this entire transcription is bars 148 to 151 inside the PDF. Have a quick listen to how it sounds. So I'm going to break that down slowly bar by bar. So he starts on an E and he does the classic root 5th octave shape. Nice and simple. Then he slides from the G into the G sharp. Up to the B, E, and then this is really cool. Sounds so nice. It's quite high up, but it sounds lovely. And then, so that's a slide. These little slides are super important. And the fingering I'm using, really all I've used so far is, actually for the whole thing, I'm just using fingers 1 and 4. So and then he does like this triplet thing So just making sure you got the rhythm right there. So it's 4, 1, 2. And then he goes to the A. I think there actually I'll go, I bar. And then he goes to the 4 chord, the A. Really nice line. I mean, that just stood out to me as soon as I heard it. Now check out this really cool triplet turnaround that happens in bar 170 and 171. Have a listen. This is really interesting. So I'm going to talk about the harmony first before I actually break down how to play it. So what he's playing is, or he's implying a slightly different turnaround. A turnaround is just what you play on the 11th and 12th bar of the blues. So instead of playing the 1 chord going to the 5 chord on the 11th and 12th bar, he's implying, which means the other instruments may not be playing this chord progression, he's just implying it over the top. So he's playing an E, then he's implying a G, then he's implying an F sharp, which is the 2 chord, 5. So this is like a really cool alternative that you could add in to kind of spice up your bass lines, and using that kind of 1 minor 3rd, 2nd, 5th. All right. And what he's doing is just outlining E, G, F sharp, B. And then he goes into the next section. And all of that, again, I'm really just using fingers 1 and 4. So that's really interesting. That's a really interesting line. And then G. Really, really cool. Again, that was another couple of bars that stood out to me when transcribing this. Another one of my favorite sections from this bass line, he actually does this a couple of times, but one example is in bars 172 to 175. Have a listen. Now, you may be thinking, why does that stand out to you, Jazz? Because he's really just playing one note, or he's just kind of hammering on that E, right? So he's playing the low E string, and then I'm playing up here. You could play it down here as well. But what I love about this is its tension and release. So something cool that you might want to take away from this video and actually implement when you're playing a blues with other people is when things are kind of building up and you're wanting to create a little bit of tension, just pedaling is called a pedal note, but you'd create tension by just pedaling the 1 chord for 4 bars. And then you can see in bar 175, he's releasing that tension and walking down to the 4. So like pedal, pedal, pedal. It doesn't really matter what rhythm, you're just kind of creating this kind of pedal underneath and a little bit of tension, like, okay, it's building, and then you can walk down to the 4 chord. Really, really cool. A cool concept that you could actually implement in your own bass playing. And then one more section that I really love, one of my favorite sections. It really showcases Donald's articulation and phrasing. It's bars 184 to 187. Have a listen. What I love about this is on that first beat, and he does this quite often if you download the transcription, you'll see on the top of the blues, on the first beat, he does a short note. It's really cool. It kind of like leaves you hanging, and then he kind of drops on that second beat. And he's kind of walking down, he's doing a walk down. And then he does the same thing in the second bar. And the reason why, so the articulation part is the short note, so he's changing up from long to short, which is articulation. The phrasing part is, if you think about melody, what he's doing is he's playing, because bass lines are kind of like counter melodies to the actual melody, right? He's playing in the first 2 bars of this section, one melody. So he's playing. So think about that as a melody if you were to sing it. But then in the 3rd and 4th bar, he plays a similar melody. So he starts the same, but he ends it differently. So it's like classic melody writing where you would take a motif, you would play that motif, and then you would play the same motif but with a slightly different ending. I just thought that stood out to me. It sounds really, really cool, because then he goes, and then he goes to the A, which is really cool as well. Make sure to click the link below to download the free bass transcription of the entire song, and then click this video next to learn more about the 12 bar blues. I'll see you there.